the message here today. Oftentimes, the pastor of the church feels a little awkward when in stewardship season, because many people criticize churches for always talking about money. And so one of the ways to diffuse that is I'm preaching this week, and Pastor Steve is going to preach next week about the issue of stewardship, and get Joshua off the hook for this, okay? Sometimes it's easier for us to say the tough things, and let us take a little heat. This passage the passages that were read this morning might seem a little familiar. Anybody remember these from about a month ago? I asked somebody what Pastor Joshua talked about a month ago, and it was Lazarus. There was Lazarus. Not much else. So I'm good. I think I'm good to go into this passage again, because as I worked with this passage a month ago, I thought, this really is great passages for stewardship, for the issue of stewardship, and looking at a message from Paul to Timothy, who's going to be a pastor, was a pastor, and an illustration from Jesus about the rich man and Lazarus. And so I want to just go over that story, tell the story again, and then bring it to how we apply that to our issue of stewardship. The context which Jesus is teaching here in Luke, he'd been illustrating God's grace and justice. He talked about the prodigal son, prodigal father, the shrewd manager, and he makes a statement in there where he says, you cannot serve God and riches. Now the Pharisees who were listening to all this, they began to scoff. They put their nose, the Greek word really is, they put their nose up in the air at Jesus. Because there was a prevailing belief then, and to some extent now in churches, that if someone is successful and wealthy, God has obviously blessed them. Have we not heard that on the TV? We turn on the TV to some of these preachers, and God will bless you. Send your $100 in, and we'll send you a little, plastic Jesus, and God will bless you. Yeah. And so Jesus decides to address them and says, well, there was a rich man. I like to subtitle this sermon as The Tale of Two Beggars. Doesn't seem like there's two, but there's really two in the story. The first is the rich man, clothed in purple, habitually dressed in fine linen and clothed in purple. And he ate sumptuously. He lived joyfully to abundance every day. So I'm sure the Pharisees were thinking, wow, that guy had it all together. He could live like a king. God bless that person. Yes. Now, some of that goes right over our heads. Clothed in purple. Purple was a dye that was very difficult to get. You had to be wealthy to get purple anything, purple clothing especially. Because it took a little tiny gland from, I believe it was a sea urchin. Steve, you remember some sort of sea-bearing creature that divers had to dive without scuba, down deep, pull these things up and get enough of them to make the color purple. So it was very expensive. Only royalty and politicians of great corruption could afford it. And he remains nameless in this story. The other one, the poor man, Lazarus, gets a name. Could these have been real people? Oh, maybe. The story's entirely possible. The Pharisees may have known a rich man who recently died, and certainly they see the poor men, poor people, obviously every day. In fact, the poor Lazarus was laid at the gate of the rich man and longed for the crumbs to fall off the table so he could eat something of this wealth that the rich man had. The rich man was clothed in fine clothing in purple and linen. And we know linen was valuable because you had to iron it, right? You don't have much linen stuff. My iron shirt stays in the closet. My linen shirt, because you got to iron it. But the poor man was clothed in what? It says that he was covered in sores. So a rich man had great clothing and beauty, and the other man had something in sores. So bad that dogs came by and licked the sores. Two extremes in life. Two men with very different lives. One with a finest entertainment, food parties, recognized by people, prestige, I'm sure, fame, respect. The other, diseased, forgotten, in the way, sick, and covered with sores, and dogs lick the wounds. Now, we don't mind when our dogs lick us in the face or we have fun, and that's the way dogs show appreciation and healing. But in the day, dogs were not appreciated like they are now, and to be licked by a dog was, you were on the bottom rung of life. Both persons experienced an unavoidable experience. They both die. We are all going to die, unfortunately. This week, scientists came up with some reasons why we tend to not think about that, and we delude ourselves that there's an end point in our lives, but there is. And both die. And here's where the story twists for the Pharisees. Jesus had earlier said that the sneering Pharisees, that they justify themselves in the sight of man, but God knows their hearts. On the exterior, they could be great and look wealthy and have it all together, but God knows their hearts. We can be the top person in our community, seemingly blessed by God, but God knows our hearts. I'm going to skip an illustration of that, but so the Pharisees so far are they're kind of right with Jesus. They're thinking, okay, you got a rich man, you got a poor man, they both died. Yeah, that's going to happen, and God knows the hearts. And then all of a sudden, Jesus turns the knife in the story. The rich guy, their idol, a model of their idea of what wealth and blessed by God means, suddenly says, from Hades, he looks up and sees Lazarus at the side of Abraham. The rich guy died and was buried, probably a big procession, a big funeral. The poor guy, there's no burial, there's no anything. He's carried up by the angels to be with Abraham's in Abraham's side. Now, for the Jewish people, Abraham was the pinnacle of historical character that started it all, really. You wanted to be by Abraham's side. It's a picture of paradise. It's a picture of heaven, as we would call it. And so when Jesus says, in hell, or in Hades, the Greek word for hell, the man looked up and saw Lazarus. The Pharisees would have been absolutely shocked at this. How can that possibly be? How can this pinnacle of obvious success and wealth be in the exact worst spot of the afterlife, and Lazarus in the absolute best spot? And so Jesus tells a story, continues with the story, and addresses the fairness of this. Read that again real quick here. The fairness of this. He says, Father Abraham, have mercy on me and send Lazarus that he may dip the tip of his finger in water that it cool off my tongue, for I'm in agony in this place. But Abraham said, child, remember that during your life you received good things, and likewise Lazarus bad things. But now he is being comforted here, and you are in agony. And besides all this, between us is a great gulf fixed, and we can't pass between there. Then I beg you, Father, send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers. Warn them, so that they will not also come to this place of torment. But Abraham said, they have Moses and the prophets. Remember, the Pharisees would have had Moses and the prophets in their queue of ultimate authority. And Jesus is saying here, you have those guys to know what you should be doing. You wouldn't or shouldn't need someone coming back to tell him. He says, but no, but if they aren't listening to that, maybe if someone came back from the dead, and rather ironically and symbolically, Jesus says, even if somebody comes back from the dead, they will not believe. This is not too long before Jesus comes back from the dead to bring us the New Testament, as Joshua brought up this morning. Now, Paul writes to Timothy, instruct the wealthy to be rich in good deeds, to do good, to be rich in good works, to be generous, to be ready to share, saving up for themselves the treasure of God's, of a foundation for future. And by so doing, you will take hold of life, which is life indeed. Love of riches, root of evil, can end up as a dead end and worse. Love of God can lead to life and life eternal. Plan A, love riches, live for yourself, be your own person, and heck with others. Or plan B, love God, serve others, new life, everlasting life. I encourage you to choose B. Back earlier in Luke, where we get the golden rule passage, he talks about, as you give, so will be given back to you. Kind of like the universal law of karma. When we see somebody speed around us and they get stuck behind a car, we kind of go and smile and say, that's good. But in there it says, for the measure by which you give, your standard of measurement will be given back to you in abundance, pressed down, shaken, overflowing. An image here is a big container of wheat or grain that somebody buys from a vendor or something, and it's not only poured to the brim, it's shaken so it settles. And you buy a box of cereal and it's got that much and the box is that big. You know the feeling. Well, imagine opening this box and it just pours out and overflows. That's what Jesus is saying here, is by giving, your box of cereal is going to overflow. In this time of stewardship, we're up for the next week here, I want to encourage you to increase your faith in God. Some of us can manage to give more of ourselves because we have more income to give. There might have been a raise or a job improvement, and you can give more. Some here might have the opposite. They recently retired, or their obligations are getting higher, and they can actually give less. Some can increase giving in the area of good deeds, of time and talent, not just treasure. But all of us, in some way, need to repurpose our lives, repurpose our budget, repurpose to put the things of God over the unnecessary and frivolous spending. The rich man lived sumptuously every day. Now, we all like to go on vacations or go on a cruise or on Friday night go out to eat or something, and we have special occasions where we live sumptuously. Few in society live sumptuously every day. What changes would that rich man have needed to do in his life to, instead of winding up in the basement of the afterlife, to wind up by the side of Abraham? Would it have killed him to be kind? Would it have killed him to care about Lazarus right on his gate? I don't think so. I think he could have, with a few small steps, maybe not wear the purple and linen every day, put it back in the closet, put on some Levi's and some sturdy dungarees, and get out there and help somebody. Possibilities are vast what the rich man could have done to move his life closer to what Abraham wanted. Abraham was going to be a blessing to all nations through his generations. To move himself closer to actually being a child of Abraham instead of a child of Abraham in name only. Would it have been a huge sacrifice for the rich man to care? Small changes can free up resources in his life, and they can free up resources in our own lives, that we can do more for God. We have a week to go before our Gratitude Sunday. We want everyone to be there. Send in your registration card or your reservation card. We kind of want to know how many are going to be there. And think seriously of your giving to God financially as well as how you live your life. Next year is 2020. And if you don't mind me stretching the analogy, can you see clearly in 2020? What's your vision like in 2020? That's pretty cheap, isn't it? But let 2020 be a year of faith and living as God would have us to live, and give our lives and to be rich in good works, regardless of our income, regardless of our status in life. We all can be rich in good works. Generous, ready to share. Storing up for ourselves the treasure of a good foundation for the future. And to take hold of that life, which is truly life. Let us pray. Lord, help us to be like you would have us to be, rich in good works, a strong foundation for the future, to be kind and caring of others. Help us to love when love is difficult. Help us to be gracious when others are not gracious around us. I'd ask your blessing upon these words in the name of Jesus. Amen. Amen. Let us stand and sing our last hymn for